comedy, pop culture, and everything in between. By idiots, for idiots. Welcome, sinners. This is Sports Idiot Nation.
Welcome in, fellow idiots, I'll do that again, obviously. Okay.
Choke on it.
Yeah.
Red leather, yellow leather.
Make sure we got a video of all of us doing that.
Yeah, for the blooper
Down
reel.
there.
It'll never ever come up and be used against us, I'm sure.
Right, since we're recording, yeah. All right, here we go. Welcome in, sinners. Today is Thursday, September 19th, episode 15 already. Whew, which means it's time to bring in another guest, Mr. Jonnydel. Welcome in, fellow idiot. You can follow Jonnydel on YouTube is the most fun way to watch, as I host a podcast with Jonnydel, fellow 49er fan, and he breaks down film, and it is unreal. Even if you are not a 49er fan, as these two gentlemen, as always, Miles Behind Enemy Lines and Mr. T.I. of Titans Idiot Nation, they can attest that the channel is straight fire because the X's and O's and explaining. We're going to get into how he got started and all that. But we're going to do something a little different. We're not going to break down X's and O's. We're going to break down, there's lots of talk these days about dynasty and what that means in baseball. You have the Yankees. In basketball, recently the Warriors. Obviously, the Bulls come to mind. But in football, it's kind of crazy how you've had a couple decades go with like the Patriots. Obviously, the Chiefs have a chance to do a three-peat this very season. And so if we look at what was the first dynasty, and let's match them up. So, Miles, I'll start with you.
Hold on. Before we get into this, I just have to say one thing, Johnny. I've only been working with Adam for a while, and I just have to say I feel for you, man, because I know you've been working with him for a long time. I don't know how you do it. I don't know what your secret is.
It's been a year and a half.
You're going to have to share that secret with us if we're going to make it the long haul here. Okay, so after the show, we're going to have to talk. All right. So
yeah,
now,
we'll definitely have a chat. Just remember, Adam is a fangirl. That's what he is, and that's how he just kind of lives his life. Is he's just happy to be there, happy to be in the room, and so you let him do his thing, and then on the other end, you'll get a few moments to talk.
I like it. He'll cut you off a few times, 5, 6, 70,
I love that Johnny's saying that, because if you watch our podcast, sometimes I look and it's been 8 minutes and I'm trying to get to the next thing that he's put in the notes that we want to talk about regarding Debo or whatever. And I'm like, I wonder if we're ever going to get to that point.
It's true. I'm totally ADHD. And so I will just have a fixation tangent and go off on something talking about the history of some sort of concept going back to 1991 and different times it was used in a specific time in a game. And Adam's just like,
I'm just sitting there. Or how the right tackle shifted his leg to the left a little bit. Oh, he pointed his toes. So great. And that's why he made the block.
Pointing toes is a very athletic thing. Just look at the single luge.
I was going to say, look at the luge. Oh, he pointed his toes. What a tremendous athlete. Yes, as we shout out to
I find it
Olympics.
Funny that Jonnydel brought up that you fangirled, or Adam fangirled you, because I kind of did the same to T.I. because we have you two, the Niners guys, and then us two, the Titans guys. Ignore the Bengals jerseys right there for now. We'll get to that later. I've got that up, the Tyler Eifert jersey. There's a reason for that.
For those great Bengals dynasties.
Yeah, just hold on. It's the anti-Niner thing. They might have lost, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Anyways, for now.
Now here's a guy.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. No. Let's not ruin it quite yet for those that may not know, that weren't alive like myself, unlike you three old dudes. Anyway, T.I. slid into his DMs saying, "Hey, man, I really like your stuff, buddy. Here's some articles that I wrote in the past," and then from there, T.I. was like, "Oh, it's great. And then
I didn't really talk like that, but
this is well. That's how I imagined
I was
seeing his face.
Monopoly
first,
man,
and then
like I was the Monopoly man, pass and go there. Right, excellent work, Miles.
Do not.
But in Miles,
$5-7
Miles' defense,
So-
I mean, yeah, he's right. You know, he slid into my DMs.
And now
He
I
sent me
do
a
the
couple
weekly article,
special
my
picks
third of the
and,
season.
you know.
My Miles Behind Enemy Lines articles for the Titans comes out. About to have my third article of the year drop here in a minute. So,
That's right.
self plug, no
Ooh.
shame.
Yeah.
Go ahead and
No
check
shame
that
in his
one out.
game.
No
And
shame
I
at
did
all.
the same.
Yeah.
I slid in on X, which, speaking of X, make sure you follow Sports Idiot Nation on X to see our viral tweet. We had one tweet out of 117 go viral, so not a good percentage, but we still have one that hit 1.4 million views on Caitlin
Dang.
Clark when people cared about Caitlin
1.4
Clark.
million.
That's
Wow.
pretty good, right, dude?
I don't think I've ever gotten. Well, I think I have one that hit 1.4 million.
There you go.
And I mean, fittingly for this episode, it was of a Cowboys player giving a 49ers player a cheap shot after the whistle blew. It was on Coach's phone. We all saw it. Yeah.
They
Yeah,
don't
I
do
posted it,
stuff like that.
and I want to say it had like 1.3, 1.4 million views.
Cowboys players
guys,
would never do something like that.
Guys, can we go ahead and get into the show? I believe Adam asked me a question. I need to answer.
That was 8 minutes
I'm
ago.
so
We're past
sorry.
that. I
I'm
really don't
sorry.
even.
You know,
Sorry.
I
Adam's
thought this
fangirling
episode was
again.
gonna be
We gotta
about
get it back.
dynasties.
I thought we were talking about Ninja Turtles. I'm sorry.
Oh, so we find a way to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles every single episode. We'll hold that to the end. All right, let's get into
Speaking
some
of green,
dynasties.
okay, TMNT green, a little yellow on the front. So we got to start with the Green Bay Packers, 1960s.
All right, there you go.
So we're going to start with the Super Bowl era. Okay, so the Packers, they ride that edge back in the 60s. 5 championships, 2 Super Bowls. First 3 NFL, no AFL. But the AFL kind of sucked. So 5 championships for the decade. We go into the 70s, the Steel Curtain, 4 championships. We'll get into that. And I've got a point that I have to make that may diss the Steelers from potential, maximum capacity. The 80s,
Bang bang Niner
your
gang.
49ers.
Okay.
My antithesis to it, of course, they lost, but that was your AFC rival of the decade. The 90s, everyone's least favorite, Dallas Cowboys, and then back-to-back decades, New England Patriots, and now are we calling the Chiefs the dynasty of the 2020s? You guys decide.
Oh man!
All right, so when we
Do
break
we
it
have
down, let's break it down and start with the 60s, and we'll break down the teams, and then we can decide a winner. So Ti, what do you know? I feel like since you're the oldest, you were around for.
Man, you guys always do this to me. First of all, I've been very vocal about my upbringing. I was watching Auburn football long before I knew the NFL even exists. So my first really tangible recollection of the NFL is a lot of Bills, Giants, Super Bowls. So, but going back just in general, Packers. I mean, let's be real. That's a long time ago. We got a bunch of hard-nosed white dudes out there just busting their ass. I mean, legends, obviously. We've got Bart Starr. We've got old Titans, Peter Skoronski's grandfather. We've got Bob Skoronski out there. I mean,
Indiana Hoosiers, baby.
Do those guys? I mean, stack. I mean, again, I'm like I said, long before the Oilers even had an inkling of moving to Nashville, I was rooting for the Packers. So it was just kind of like I adopted them because I didn't have a team. It was like, hey, these guys are fun to watch. Brett Favre's fun to watch. So, of course, I've got there's a little inkling of me that wants to kind of give them the nod. But do I think that they could compare with some of these teams today? The Patrick Mahomes and the Tom Brady's. I mean,
There's no way.
Even the Cowboys and Niners. I mean, I just don't know. It's just two completely different styles of play, 2 completely different points of view. I mean, we're still talking about.
We're at a different point.
That's what I was about to say. We're still talking about goalposts in the beginning of the end zone. Like, what is that about anyway? Like, somebody was like, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's, all these injuries, these unnecessary injuries that are happening. Let's just move this to the back of the end zone where nobody really has to hit it, unless it's just an accident." It's
Right.
kind of like
the goalposts were a lowercase h.
Yeah, it's like what? How many years did it take for them to cut the hole out of the peach basket? For basketball, or like, hey, let's just stop knocking the ball out, make it fall through,
Make it fall.
somebody was like, holy shit, you're a genius. You know, like that's what I always felt with the goalpost. Like, come on. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, yeah, that you can't knock those legendary Packers teams, but I mean, if we're just going head to head, it's tough for those guys to compete with today's talent. Maybe even the Steel Curtain. I mean, do they compete with the Steel Curtain? I don't know. You know, I'm not knocking them. It's tough for me to sit here and say for sure.
I think to make it truly debatable, you have to take the team for what they were in the era. I think that's the only way you can possibly have the argument is you have to take the team for what they were in the era compared to teams of their time.
So, all right, Jonnydel, get in there. Do you know how many teams were their competition? I mean, now there's 30, whatever teams in the NFL. There wasn't 30 teams to compete with, right?
No, I mean, at that point, I want to say it was 13 teams or 12 teams, something like that in the NFL. There's 12 teams, I think, in the AFL, and that's when they merged, then it became the Super Bowl, obviously. So, because one thing I did is I was going back and looking at these different teams and saying, okay, how dominant were they on each side of the ball during their decade? And that's harder with the Green Bay Packers because most of the decade, they're, if you're talking about like a top 5 team, that's a lot different when there's only 12 teams in the league compared when there's 26 or 28 or 32. Those are very different things. I think when you look at the Green Bay Packers, you have to really look at and all these dynasties really is what kind of legacy did they leave behind and how much did they impact the game beyond that? Because if it was a team that was dominant in more than just ways of they had all the best players, then they will transcend that. People will take their ideas. Because I mean, it's kind of like people don't come away and say we're gonna have the fielding strategies of the Yankees and take those with everybody, because everybody looked at the Yankees like, well, they won so many world championships because they always had the best players because they paid everybody more than everybody else. That was the winning strategy. It wasn't that they came up with a really innovative idea. And football is so much about innovative ideas, and it's about, the leading edge on that. When you look at the Green Bay Packers, I do think there was a lot of things out of the 60s that really carried for about 30 years. To me, if there was a team that could challenge the 49ers for a great dynasty, I think it would be the Packers, because you look at the impact beyond what it was. Like, Vince Lombardi, one of his pupils, a guy who sat and learned under him forever, was John Madden. And that led to him, he took so many of the fundamentals he learned from Vince Lombardi about offense and the Packers sweep and took that to the Raiders and won a couple Super Bowls. So, it had an impact beyond that. The first inklings we have of zone blocking ideas comes from Vince Lombardi, as far as we can understand, as far as, historians have been able to trace that idea of that offensive concept. Vince Lombardi called it a doodad block, that it was just everything was before then was you block this specific guy. And he suddenly said, well, what if these guys switch roles? Can we switch our blocking assignments on the fly? And it was a doodad block. And that develops 30 years later into the wide zone from Alex Gibbs. And, that is the primary form of run-based offenses in the NFL today. So it has some roots back there. And the idea of the Super Bowl and what it is and what that means to be the first team. Now, with all of that, again, did they have the same mountain to climb that a team in other decades had to climb? No, they didn't.
Right.
The AFL was terrible. And the remnants of the AFL
cheeks,
were terrible.
As Johnny would say, cheeks.
Well, yeah, terrible. Even into the 80s and 90s. I mean, it went like 17 years where an NFC team, which was the old NFL, won the Super Bowl for so long. So like they didn't. It wasn't the same mountain to climb. That's where I see it as a little bit different. But I think as getting things going and leaving a legacy in football, I think the Packers, need some respect there. As much as I hate to say that, because as a Niner fan from the 90s, like, God, I hate the Packers.
I think to your point too, Jonnydel, with a lot of these dynasty debates, so many of us want to just focus on the teams themselves. We need to focus on the coaches as well. Vince Lombardi, I mean, he just has the Super Bowl trophy named after him, but how revolutionary he was. Something like that.
BFD.
But the league entirely changed because of him and so many other coaches that we'll discuss as well, I'm sure. But he needs to be mentioned and he needs to be a part of this argument as well, I feel.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a lot of stuff that translates, like you said, where the game is changed because, like you said, if the Yankees invented shifting, like in on defense, where they shift their shortstop over to the right side of second base or something like that, and they won 3 championships because of that, where no one else was doing it, then okay, you can talk about it. But that's not the case. But it is with the Packers the way they've done that. So let's move on then to the 70s. And my first question is going to be regarding the defense because they were the guys that got more commercials on TV. They were the ones that people really talked about. And would their defense, was it more of scheming was so ahead of the game, or was it truly guys like Deacon Jones and guys like that who were
Mean Joe Green.
Mean Joe Green, who were just so much better than the competition. However, if they stack up now against, I think of Vernon Davis, one of the first freak tight ends, you're like, good Lord. Vernon Davis going against like Dick Butkus, get out of here. Sorry. Like, there's no way, right? But is Pittsburgh in that realm where it's like, yeah, right, good luck, buddy? Or were they that good? What do you guys think? And everybody at once. I did that on purpose to see. I did that on purpose to see if anyone.
So if we're asking
I
if
would
like
take it, but I've talked enough.
Yeah, I was gonna say if we're just basically asking the question if Mean Joe Green can compete with today's players and put them on their ass, I would say that he definitely could. Does that mean that that's going to translate to dominance on the field as a team? I don't know.
Well, look at the DBs. Could the DBs hang with the receivers?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You've got so many
white
mismatches.
Guys.
Yeah, you've got so many. You've got so many mismatches all over the field, and that's what the game is. The whole game of football is exploiting the mismatches from week to week, right? I mean, maybe back then it was more of just being the more dominant opponent, but today it's all about scheming. It's all about exploiting a weakness. As a Titans fan, I mean, maybe not.
You're
anymore,
hoping for that one day,
but it's like they're always scheming against us as the tight end because we consistently can never defend the tight end. It's like every single team faces us. It's like you're guaranteed their tight end's going to get at least 1 touchdown, maybe 8 catches, 75 yards, and you could bet on it. So hopefully, that
unless
changes.
Jimmy Garoppolo's trying to throw the tight end in the end zone,
I knew it was coming. I knew you were going to bring it up. I knew you were going to bring it up. I was about to say, unless it's
Johnny,
George
I
Kittle
went
in
to
the back
that
of the
game.
end zone.
Okay,
look, let it go, Adam. It was years ago.
I took Miles to that game for Christmas.
Show me on the doll where porn star Jimmy hurt you.
Yeah, man. We lost that game by 3 freaking points, and we should have won. And I'm still mad.
And you know what? We lost the Super Bowl last year, so that sucks worse. But I look, and part of the question you have with this is, okay, are we playing under 1970s NFL rules or 2018 NFL rules? Because if you're playing in 1970s rules, the players that the Steelers have on their defense would obliterate players in the NFL today, just because they are playing with techniques and physicality that is not allowed today. I mean, the corners would just wrestle the receivers all the way down the field. There was really no such thing as illegal contact down the field, where receivers now you breathe on them and they're going to fall over a lot of times. I mean, like, and offenses now are based around that. Their defense changed a lot over the years because they had to adjust to what they had to play. But back in the day, there was a reason that teams weren't really spread out, because if you spread your team out with the way that they could clock you going over the middle, you were going to get everybody killed. It wasn't just suddenly it took people 40 years to figure out you could put 4 wide receivers out on the field. The Steelers started doing that, but they understood, like, if you didn't run seam routes, you didn't run post routes versus a single safety over the middle. And we'll get into this with the Niners of the 80s, but you were going to get your receiver killed if you did that. I mean, just straight head taken off. And suddenly now...
Go ahead.
Well,
finish your point and I'll get into
I just look at, like, the Steelers. If you actually look at where they ranked in the league, if you say either a top 5 defense in either points allowed or yards, because I think neither one is fully tells a story, or offensive yards or points scored, top 5 in the league. We always think of the Steelers of the 70s as a primarily defensive team. Well, it was I have it written 7 times in the 70s they had a top 5 defense, either in points allowed or yards. They also had 7 times they were a top 5 offense from points scored or yards gained. So they were a very balanced team. They had Lynn Swann and forget the other guy. They did a Football Life on them. That they brought a different dynamic to the passing attack. Now you actually go and look at the numbers. It wasn't anything amazing by any standards.
Wasn't it Stallworth?
Yeah, it was Stallworth. Because neither guy went over 1,000 yards. So it wasn't like these guys were.
That's crazy.
I think Lynn Swann had career like 4,000 yards, something like that. It was guys are passing that in a handful of seasons, and but it did change the game. It added this passing element where then they had that ridiculous run defense, and it was just like it was men playing football. Of here's the line, you're not going to cross it. I would say it would be hard. You'd be harder pressed to find a tougher, like physically tougher football team than the 1970 Steelers.
Miles, get in there.
And so I think that's really important that Jonnydel is bringing up the point of the different rules for different eras and everything like that with physicality and also size overall. Players naturally today are bigger, different diets, different things that they're doing throughout, different regimens and workouts and physical trainers, blah, blah, blah. That's why you can only judge really based on what they did in their era. Another big thing that's changed, and Adam, you alluded to this before with the defensive players getting in the advertisements. Wasn't it Mean Joe Green that didn't have his jersey and took off his pants and threw it to a kid during a commercial? Different rules, different eras. You did that today, he's going to prison. So let's not let that pass us by either. That's really weird. Anyhow, with the Steelers as well, and my whole thing about dominance for your era really has to be factored in. Are the Steelers the only team of the 70s? I mean, let's go back to 1970, 1971, 1972. Who won the AFC those 3 years? I think one team won undefeated of that team, the Miami Dolphins. They were dominant for the first 3 years. Yeah, they lost the Super Bowl in there, but they go back to back. They have the last undefeated team. A couple things happen here and there. We're not even talking about the Steelers. We're talking about the Miami Dolphins of the 70s alone. Possibly a better coach overall, too, as well, as I brought up in the last segment with the Green Bay Packers. So I think the fact with the Steelers not being completely as dominant as the Packers were, and I think as we'll get to the Niners, you got the Redskins in there, blah, blah, blah. But truly, the dominance of the 70s was really in the latter half of it. And I think that's something you have to factor in if you're going to say, hey, yeah, you have the physicality. Yeah, they had your Jack Lamberts, your Mean Joe Greens, so on and so forth. You had Terry Bradshaw, 4-time Super Bowl winner. But were they really the team of the 70s? I don't know.
Well, 4 and 6 years, wasn't it? It was back-to-back twice, wasn't it? For the Steelers?
Still the question, did the ball touch the ground?
Man, the camera angles were crazy back then. Where can you imagine now?
They were so bad.
Yeah,
that is so. It's so crazy to think. And you watch those guys talk back and forth. The Raiders players and Steelers players. It's so cool to see them still argue over it today. And then Franco, the way he smiles, it's almost like he knows, but there's no way ever, even by himself, he'll ever say out loud, touch the ground. Ever. He'll never, ever admit it. You know what I mean? That was wild.
One thing I will say about the Steelers that I think often gets overlooked, and I think is a discredit to him, and I think it's because he is more known these days as an announcer and just a face of television in general when it comes to the NFL. But Terry Bradshaw gets overlooked so often of what he meant to the game, how tough he was. I mean, everything he brought to the Steelers. It's just so many people talk about legendary quarterbacks, and he gets his credit, but I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. And he's crazy. He's crazy as hell. I mean, he's really
idiot.
is.
Yeah, perfect idiot. He needs to come on the show.
And he's there's that one movie where he's shows his butt
naked,
he's feeding his fish with his butt hanging out, which is
failure to launch.
Yeah, not a lot of
to launch.
There you go. Miles has it. He's got knows that exact spot. It's
he knows the timestamp on that.
Yeah. 47 minutes into the film. Miles has it paused. But, I just think, like, if we're talking about Steelers, it would be a discredit if we didn't mention about, just what he means to the game of football to me in general. I mean, beyond the field and just commentating. Like, he's one of those dudes. Like, when you think of NFL, you think of crazy-ass Terry Bradshaw,
Yeah, he's a likable guy for sure.
Yeah.
His numbers aren't quite there, and that's why I don't think people give him that. But, hey, he did lead them all 4 times, and he was the guy at the helm, and he was the leader of men, and people loved him, respected him, and talk to a Steeler fan negatively about Terry Bradshaw, watch out. Like, they'll come for you, for sure. So, no, I get it.
Don Shula was the coach of the 70s, and I think for that reason, Steelers
don't get the nod.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. So as we move to the 80s, I want to let Miles go first because obviously I am biased and Johnny's biased. I know Johnny will have a lot of good info and he'll talk for 17 minutes straight on why it's the Niners. But Miles when discussing this before the show had a couple good points, honestly, that I actually didn't necessarily think of it that way. And I'm the one freaking biased the most. I mean, so, but I just thought it was interesting. So Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, and I hate to ruin so much because a lot of this has to do with the teams that we'll later discuss. So do you want me to go ahead and even touch on the later decades or the only the ones we've discussed before?
Well, what you said about the Niners, of the fact that it's hard to argue that the Niners are not the best. I just thought what you said was interesting.
I totally agree. But I think it's so so pivotal to think about taking the entire decade because so much we want to look at the Packers. They won 5 championships in the 60s, and I'll touch back on that in a minute. Steelers won 4. Niners won 4. 90s, the Cowboys win 3, and now 2 kind of 3 with Kansas City, with plenty more to go. Kansas City could win 7 this decade. We just don't know yet. But in any case, I keep talking about the true dominance of the era. There was no other team in the 80s that really could come up and touch the Niners. I already mentioned it before. You have the Redskins that win 2 and then a third in the early 90s with 3 different quarterbacks, mind you. But the Niners, from whether you want to start your decade in the 80s, from 1980 to 1989 or 1981 to 1990, the consistency from year to year to year is like none other. Maybe the Packers as well, but again, that's pre-Super Bowl era, which Jonnydel already talked about. You had only 12, 13 teams. So it's hard to take those first 5, almost 6 years of the decade to include them.
Right.
Especially when the AFL really didn't compete until the Jets won Super Bowl 3 at the very end of the 60s. So if you look at every year, you break down every year of the 80s, it's hard to argue that the Niners aren't truly the best team for a given decade. If you want to make it at the very core of what we're saying our argument is, I don't know how you can't pick the 1980 Niners. And of course, I try to put my Bengals jersey up to be the antithesis of it because that's 2 of your 4 Super Bowls that you had during the 80s, and Tyler Eifert, guy I went to school with for 12 years from first grade up to my senior year of high school, and just an all-time great dude, and have a bunch of family that live in Cincy. Still to this day, they're talking about those Super Bowls because they don't have much else. Obviously, the Reds were great back in
Big Red Machine.
Those years, I mean, the 80s, they slipped off just a little bit, but they're still good. Late 70s, early 90s, they were great. The Bengals obviously made the Super Bowl a couple years ago, but as a city, man, they're still talking about, if John Candy's ass wasn't in the end zone, we would have won that Super Bowl, So
how many times has Jonnydel and I talk about Joe Cool talking about, with Harris Barton, like, hey, I think that's John Candy. Like, we've definitely talked about that. So I know Jonnydel has some stats on why the Niners are the best. So go ahead, man.
Hold on, real quick though, before Johnny goes into his diatribe here, real quick. I want to make sure I just want to make sure my timeline is correct. So when technically did we switch from Montana to Young? When was that? Was that 90s
That was
or
after
was that
the
80s?
1990 season. So
that's what I thought. I thought that was 90. Okay, so
yeah.
we're strictly talking Montana here. Like we're
Right.
not talking. Yeah, that's what I
Good,
thought.
good call. That's a good
sure.
question.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
good, Ti. Now sit back down.
Yeah.
Go color.
I'm kidding, but that was seriously.
I don't have my notebook from a couple episodes back, so.
But Joe
I'm just gonna
Montana
pretend I'm
did have
drawing.
a couple seasons in there.
Yes.
Kansas City stud.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about that switch from Montana to Young is that the 49ers were actually more dominant on paper, but didn't have the Super Bowl titles. So, if you look at years where they led the league in point differential, 2 of those 3 years in the 90s were when they didn't win a Super Bowl. They had more years where they led the league in point differential in the 90s than they did in the 80s. 4 times in the 90s they led the league in point differential. So they were, winning by a wider margin than any other team in the league, but they only got 1 Super Bowl in there. Where in the 80s they had 3 times and they won 4 Super Bowls. I think you have some of the greatest players to ever play the game that were on that team. So if we're looking at a fabulous dynasty, you look at, okay, do they have blue chip players, legendary players that will be forever talked about? Joe Montana will forever be talked about. Jerry Rice will forever be talked about. Ronnie Lott will forever be talked about. These are some of the greatest players to ever play. Then you have the moments of football, right? The Immaculate Reception is that for the Steelers. You have moments kind of like that, but it's more sad for the Bills with the Cowboys. Of the guy running the fumble back and then him, stripping it in the back of the end zone. That's like the great Cowboys moment of winning the Super Bowl of the 90s, which really isn't their moment. It's more of a ha-ha moment against the Bills. You have the Patriots. I think, their maybe signature one in there is they're coming back from 25 points down in the Super Bowl. You have that as a moment. Do you have
that and the interception against the Seahawks as well?
Yeah. Interception, but they also are on the other side of it with the David Tyree catch, with the Mario Manningham catch. So, they're on both sides of those big moments, this Philly special. Whereas when you look at the 49ers, you have moments of the catch, maybe the most iconic moment in football, period. Then you also have Joe Montana, going to say it, Miles, hitting John Taylor in the back of the end zone, or Jerry Rice in the back of the end zone John Taylor in the back of the end zone versus the Bengals, right? Like, those are legendary moments in football that will forever be etched and will forever be played. So you look at the 49ers, they had blue chip players on everything. They had the big moments. And then you look at what we've talked about, the coaching of that. If you look at any single coach who had more impact on the NFL and a legacy, there's nobody even close to Bill Walsh. That legacy is so far and so wide. We talk about coaching trees, that guys have coaching trees. Bill Walsh does not have a coaching tree. He has a coaching universe. So if we just look at the guys, that coached and have ties back to Bill Walsh. Okay, his immediate assistants, we have guys like George Seifert, who then went on and won 2 Super Bowls with the 49ers. We have Mike Holmgren, who went and won a Super Bowl with the Packers, took the Seahawks, completely turned that franchise around, took them from a laughingstock to a Super Bowl contender. You had Ray Rhodes, and then who's worked for Ray Rhodes? Sean Payton, Bill Callahan, Mike McCarthy. Guys who've done some things in the league. You have Sam Weish, worked directly under Bill Walsh. And who worked under him? Dick LeBeau, Mike Mularkey, Dave Shula. Dennis Green worked directly under Bill Walsh. Who worked under Dennis Green? Brian Billick, Mike Tice, Tony Dungy. And under those guys, Marvin Lewis, Jack Del Rio, Scott Linehan, Lovie Smith, Mike Tomlin, Herm Edwards.
The name that stands out the most to me, though, is Mike Mularkey.
That's a bunch of
Titans
malarkey.
Former
Yeah.
Titans great. Former Titans great.
Just George Seifert. You have Mike Shanahan, and then Kyle Shanahan under him, and then all his coaches that have come out from under him. And you have Pete Carroll and all the coaches that came under him, because he was George Seifert's defensive coordinator at the 49ers. You have Gary Kubiak and the guys that have come under him. Jeff Fisher worked for George Seifert.
It's another very
legend.
important name.
Under Mike Holmgren. Under Mike Holmgren, you have Andy Reid, you have Marty Mortonwig, you have John Gruden, you have Steve Mariucci. I mean, these are all so many guys that are out there. I mean, you're talking combined, half the Super Bowls that have been won since 1980 have been won by somebody tied to Bill Walsh. So,
20 to 30 years, though, we have to revisit this with Bill Belichick. In 20 to 30 years, you have to revisit this.
Yes, because he's had so many assistants that have really been, knocking it out of the park where they go.
And Steve Belichick's mullet.
And then you pour into the college football scene then. Because, I mean, his tree has poured and dominated college football. So that's something you have to consider in 20, 30 years.
When you record everybody's practices, I mean.
Well, I was going to say the one Super
Patriot
Bowl
way.
we have to show some love to the video camera for a couple of those Patriots Super Bowls.
Show some love, and that's what Miles did in college. So of course he's biased towards the camera.
Before we move on, though, like one thing I want to say though about Bill Walsh and about just the West Coast attack. I mean, just how it transcended football. 100% agree. It really changed the game from a smash mouth run to high octane deep passes, 50, 60 point games when we were kids, aside from Miles, here Miles, I'm not sure probably what his first introduction to video game football was, but when I was growing up, it was Bill Walsh college football. I mean, Bill Walsh college football, and then John Madden. I mean, that's you eventually got your Troy Aikman football, I think, on Genesis and stuff. But Bill Walsh college football was your go-to. I mean, dude's a legend, and he's changed both formats. I mean, the pros and colleges. So I mean, I have to agree with kind of everything Johnny said. Like the coaching tree is just ridiculous. What he meant to the
universe,
the game.
as he well said. It's not a tree; it's a universe.
Yeah, it's the WCU there, the Walsh Cinematic Universe.
Walsh Cinematic, and the 80s 49ers are known for their offense because again, it was so innovative and they were pushing so many things in new directions, but their defense was as good as anybody. If we look at the same metric that I looked at with the Steelers of how many times did they have a top 5 defense and top 5 offense, either in points scored or allowed or yards, 8 times from 1980 to 1989. In 1980, they were a rebuilding team. They were just a few years past, were owned by the Marabitos, not the DeBartolos. And so the DeBartolos bought them in 77. And so, they were rebuilding from scratch. So 80 is even like, do you really count 80 with the 49ers? But even including that, where they were like 27th in league on both, 8 times during that decade, they had a top 5 offense and defense. So, I mean, they were as dominant on both sides of the ball, but people forget that because of the offensive side. There's only one team that actually really did anything better than them in that regard, and that was the 2010 Patriots. And because they had the best offense every single year. But we don't remember the Patriots offense of the 2010s, even though they had more years of higher rankings. We don't remember that Patriots offense. It wasn't like everybody turned around and said, let's copy what the Patriots are doing, because you had to have the players the Patriots had to do that. The 49ers, everybody was trying to copy the West Coast offense. They still are doing some sort of vein of the West Coast offense. It's in almost every team. When I watch film of every team every week, I see West Coast concepts every single week. There's certain plays that go back to, I mean, you look at Dragon or Lion, which is slant, flat, double slant. That was something Bill Walsh was doing with the Browns when he was working for Paul Brown. And
who has the best coaching tree.
and he brought over, I mean, if you kind of think about like Paul Brown is like then as the top of the tree above Bill Walsh, then he's got, the whole Walsh lineage.
Amos Alonso Stagg.
Well, who was Paul Brown's dad though? Who is Paul Brown's dad? Because he's responsible for Paul Brown, so he might as well be there. He's the most
real top of the coaching.
The most legendary coach. And then Paul Brown's mom, who produced Paul Brown, it's like she's up there as well. So let's give credit where credit's due.
Hey, Peyton and Eli's Manning's mother is responsible for Tom Brady not winning like a dozen Super Bowls, basically. So I remember Peyton said that. So shout out to my mother for keeping Tom Brady from winning like 57 Super Bowls.
So there would be a photo right now of Tom Brady with rings on his toes. Like you'd
Yeah.
have to see that.
That would be horrible. That would be the worst. That'd just be the worst.
All right, let's figure out. Let's be honest here and figure out if a team can dethrone the Niners because it doesn't seem like it. And as we move to the 90s, Dallas had been a bit of a joke. And as much as we hate on Jerry Jones now because he hasn't done anything in 30 years, whatever, though in the 90s, and I hate to admit it, they were back with a true vengeance, and their numbers showed it. They had the stars. They had when you go through Jonnydel's criteria, right? The only thing they didn't necessarily have that I can think of is like the iconic moment that I don't think of anything. I think of Alvin Harper's catch deep down the field against us, against the Niners. There's nothing really.
It's the pick six in Super Bowl 30, maybe, because every
Against
other
the
Super Bowl
Steelers, yeah,
they
Larry
they
Brown.
kicked everyone's ass.
Larry Brown was
yeah.
the Super Bowl MVP, which is nuts.
Right? Yeah.
So I don't know, but okay, they won 3 Super Bowls. They had the stars, the big 3. They had the defense. They did have it all. The Jimmy Johnson came over from the University of Miami, was buddies with Jerry Jones, and they hit it off until they didn't, and then he skipped town. We all know that.
Weird how that happens with Jerry Jones,
Yeah.
Strange.
But then it doesn't happen with Jason Garrett, who sucked. Like, doesn't make sense. But so
the clapper.
What do you?
Jason Garrett.
Yeah, he was a great clapper. Exactly. He's doing the old Jason Garrett there. He's clapping.
We just got stopped on 4th and 1. We just lost the game.
And he's clapping. Yeah. How did he remain the coach for so long? Yeah. So, all right. But are we giving the Cowboys any credit? And I'm okay with you guys saying no. Miles, are you giving them any credit?
Well, I think the real credit belongs to Barry Switzer because no one remembers that he won a Super Bowl as the head coach of the Cowboys.
That's 95. It's a good take.
The reason that Troy Aikman retired.
I mean, Jerry Jones, I think that team was a winner in spite of him more than they were because of him. And I think that goes to show what happened later in the 90s when they completely fell off a cliff. That team had the opportunity to be even more dominant than the Niners, but they weren't because Jerry Jones is about Jerry Jones. And you go back to the beginning of the decade, you go to the latter years of the 90s, they were mid. So I think that throws them out of discussion. I'm done. Give it to someone else. I don't want to talk about this.
I'll say this is what I'll say about the Cowboys. Let's dissect the parts, right? They've got Emmett, they've got Irvin, they've got Aikman. Does Emmett make the same team on another team? Like, is it Aikman? Is it Irvin? Is it the combination of the 3?
Is it the offensive line?
I mean, let's take the Emmitt Smith holdout. We did the episode on holdouts, and it's like, well, we're not going to pay you. And he's just like, okay, cool. So they start out 0-2. I think they get demolished by Buffalo, who, they just beat and in the Super Bowl. And then Emmett comes back. Jerry Jones apologizes. Emmett comes back. They then run off 12 straight and finish 12-2. I mean, I'm just like,
what about Moose though? Daryl Johnston.
Oh yeah,
come on.
Yeah, dude.
What about Jay Novacek?
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's like they had the players, they had the personalities, but was that their downfall in the end? Was it the fact that their ego got the best of them? To me, still, I mean, I'm not a fan of Troy Aikman personally. But still, when I go back and watch tape of him, I was young. When I go back and watch tape now, it's like, man, he was a damn good quarterback. I mean, he really was. He was the perfect fit for what they wanted to do. So does that mean that I dethroned the 80s Niners just because of what they did? I don't know. I think they were a little more finesse. I think the Niners were a little more tenacity, really. I think the Niners are a good combination of like that 70s toughness and the finesse that the game was morphing into. I think the Cowboys are a product of like that kind of like peak of ego and skill, finding that balance. And Michael Irvin is just a prime example of that. I mean, and not to mention all of their extracurricular activities that they were known for. So it's really tough to. I will never discredit them because they were an amazing team, but yeah, I would still take the Niners. I think over them. I think I have to agree with you guys.
Johnny, would you give any flowers to Dallas?
Well, so here's my issue with Dallas. We're talking about a team of a decade, right? Well, how do you consider a team of a decade when they only were really there for half a decade? I mean, the Cowboys, it was really 92, 93, 94, 95. Those were the years. Nobody talks about. There's a reason why the Packers and 49ers still have a rivalry from the 97 and 98 years. And it's not with the Cowboys from those years. Where were the Cowboys? If they're the team of the 90s, why does nobody remember what you did in between 1996 and 1999? That you weren't even in consideration for a Super Bowl. You weren't even in a consideration for being a team to beat in the playoffs. How can you be a team of a decade?
It's true. I mean,
when you have that, they had a top 8, they had a top 5 defense nearly every year of the 90s, and they had multiple years where they were not even in consideration. Nobody thought, oh yeah, the Cowboys, you got to watch out for them. It was why Cowboys fans are still angry today, is because the last time they won was in 95 off the remnants, the shadow, bringing Dion away from the 49ers. They didn't beat the 49ers. They took Dion away from the 49ers. And partially Dion wanted to go and hang out with the extracurriculars that were over at the Cowboys and, the $35 million. But that was it. I mean, when you have an owner like Jerry Jones who fires a coach like Jimmy Johnson, and that just tears the whole franchise down and has never been able to put the pieces back together. No, you had a really short burst of a bright star. That was it. It was not a team. I have a hard time even calling the 90s Cowboys a dynasty because it was 3 out of 4 really good years. You had 4 really good years. But that is not a dynasty to me. That's a really good team. A dynasty is the ability to keep rebuilding your team year after year after year, which is what the 49ers did. The 49ers really, you look at their dynasty, to me, the dynasty era of 49ers is really 1981 to 1998. Because they were one of the top teams in the NFL, and they won the Super Bowl in 94, and they were still in contention. When you look at the Steelers, they were still tough into the early 80s. When you look at the Patriots, they were there for 20 years. The Packers were still tough. The Cowboys were really good, and then
they weren't.
That was it. That's all.
Should we add
they
that
were.
sound effect, Adam? I like that one.
It absolutely was. So, no, the Cowboys are the last on this list because you had 4 good years. You had 6 years of a dog dragging his rear end on the ground. So, no, that's how it is.
All right.
I really would like to see one more thing. One more thing. Had Barry Switzer not left to go to Dallas, would he be in the conversation with Nick Saban? I think we talk about Barry Switzer on a similar level as Nick Saban in the college game, had he not ruined himself by going to win 1 Super Bowl with Dallas. That's the last thing I'll say on that.
Hey, there's worse things
Barry
to do.
Switzer didn't have the drive to do it. That was the biggest problem that Troy Aikman had with him, was that he did not have the insane commitment level to want to do that. And I'm not meaning that's what people should do or that's the best goal in life. I'm just meaning to do what Nick Saban's done. You have to be insane. You have to be insane to do that and grind year after year.
And that's fine. He would have gotten away with a lot more back in the 90s compared to Saban years. But I think he would have done a hell of a lot more that we would be talking about him more than he fell off a cliff because he went to Dallas for 1 Super Bowl.
Well, remember, Troy Aikman retired because he was like, he's like, Barry wouldn't get on anybody about anything. He was just like, well, you guys can try a little harder. I just think that becomes really hard to sustain year after year after year after year after year, like Nick Saban did. Nick Saban was known, he had a culture of expectation that it wasn't just about having good players. It was coming in and we will mold you into a good player. Barry Switzer never had that feeling with me. He feel like he had some good ideas and he could put together short runs, but to do something that Nick Saban does, I just didn't see it quite the same way.
True. Screw Dallas. Moving on. We don't care. Good point about them not being around
Gary
for the
Plummer
second
Dallas.
half.
Dez didn't drop
Gary
it.
Plummer. Yeah.
Dez didn't drop it. They're still
geez.
crying about
totally,
Dez.
Totally different era
That's
anyway.
my quarterback. That's my quarterback.
T.O. So, all right, if we move on from the 90s, this is a weird one because it's the only team that carried it so long. You did talk about the Niners from 81 to 98 or whatever, but they only won one time in the 90s. Yes, they were still showed dominance, whereas the Patriots, to me, holy smokes, like the only thing that I'll be okay with is knowing that Tom Brady is from the Bay Area where I hail from as well. But other than that, it's like, ugh, man, what can you say? The dude had 2 Hall of Fame careers in one. I mean, it is absolutely insane how he was able to do that. So first I will ask, is Tom Brady the GOAT? And then how are the Patriots how do they not dethrone the Niners? T.I., you go first.
Sure. Is Tim Brady the GOAT? Is Tim Brady the GOAT? So let's be real. The debate will always live on, no matter the sport, no matter the player. You know, whether it's LeBron, whether it's Jordan, you know, whether it's Gretzky, whether it's Lemieux, like whatever, right? My take is it's a misfortunate sport to where you're judged on championships. I mean, Dan Marino is a hell of a quarterback, but at the end of the day, nobody is going to remember him outside of Ace Ventura and the people that watched him play, right? Let's be real. Like in 20, 30 years from now, people will be like, who? Kids are going to be like, Dan Marino.
He's got a solid last name. I'll give him that.
But so people will remember Tom Brady forever. There are countries that all 4 of us combined cannot pronounce that know Tom Brady exists right now. So is he the GOAT? Unfortunately, swallowing the vomit in my throat, I have to say that he is, because that's the world we live in. We are judged by championships. If Patrick Mahomes surpasses him by championships, which he very well, unfortunately, probably could and maybe do it, like,
please, God,
dude,
no.
Is he the GOAT? Are we having this conversation in 10 years from now going, well, now Patrick Mahomes is the GOAT? I mean,
well, not too many people lose the best rated player in all of football. Not many quarterbacks lose the guy who is voted number 1 and still win the Super Bowl. I hate to say that about Mahomes.
Win 2.
Sure.
Win 2.
I mean, but Brady too, though. Like, let's be real. I'm not saying that Tampa Bay didn't have a good team, but I mean, he proved who he is. He went down there.
That's another factor.
Went right down there.
Good Lord. He even went and showed that it wasn't the coach, because he got a different coach. Like, whoops.
And he even let Antonio Brown live with him. I mean,
he's the GOAT for that.
He's the GOAT. He is the GOAT.
Living with someone with CTE.
I mean, Miles, I'll give it to you. Can you live with Antonio Brown?
Well, if someone's going to go out there and call someone a cracker straight to their face, just get on another team. That's pretty badass, actually. You know what? I kind of like it. That's kind of funny to get away from the Raiders. But I do want to pull it back to one thing T.I. was mentioning about championships, people being measured by championships alone. If you measure by just championships, remember, you're making an argument that Trent Dilfer is a better quarterback than Dan Marino. Then, just letting you know. I think with
Brad
the argument
George.
of
Brad Johnson.
Brad Johnson.
Go on and on. But in any case, if we're going to make the argument about who's the GOAT of football, we need to take it a step further. Tom Brady, of course, he's the best of all time when it comes to football. I hate him as much as anyone else here. The question is not, is he the best football player of all time? Is he the best athlete of a major North American sport of all time? The answer for me is no, but he's on that pantheon. So I think that's the real question here.
Well, you could say
is he
like
better
Michael
than
Phelps
Jordan?
is a better athlete.
No. You didn't listen to me. I said of the major North American sports, the 4 major North American sports.
Jordan
put out.
What's the 4th one? NASCAR?
No, Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky.
It's not even close, because Mario Lemieux is not even in the top 5 of all time. So stop talking about hockey. In any case, no, Wayne Gretzky is.
I don't think hockey's real big in Mexico. You said North American.
Of the 4 major North American sports, yes. Thanks. So it's for me, it's Jordan 1, Gretzky's number 2, and then for me, Tom Brady comes in at 3rd.
that's fair. Then let's talk about their dynasty.
It's true though. Tom Brady was not on the Saturday morning Sports All Stars.
That is fair.
Michael
What
Jordan
a crazy show that was.
So.
Who drew that up? And then not only drew it up, who got the okay? You know, there's like a board meeting where they have like 7 people in the room that they have to okay the cartoon. They view it after 17 minutes. They're like, green light it. We're doing it. Who are those people? I'd like to meet them.
It was Bo Jackson, right? Was it Bo
yeah.
the third?
Oh yeah. It was
Bo Jordan and Gretzky, right?
Bo knows cartoons.
And Wayne was quoted by Michael Scott as Michael Scott. I mean, so
you missed
always that.
Actually, you know what? He is number one. No longer Jordan. Yeah. Michael Scott is the greatest athlete of all time. Michael Scott.
Oh, we have derailed.
I do have a problem though with this number, top 4 sports of North America and having hockey in there. Okay,
Soccer?
Because
what are you saying?
I'm saying, are we forgetting our neighbor to the south? I mean, it's still North America. We have a lot of neighbors. Latin America is still North America.
Sports.
Latin America is still North America, and I'm sorry, I've been there. They don't have a whole lot of ice. Like they're more just saying,
you guys are smart enough to know the 4 major sports. The 4 major professional sports are the NFL, the MLB, the NBA, and the NHL. Those are the 4 major professional sports. La Liga is not in there. MLS is not in there.
MLS.
Right.
Good Lord.
Right.
Shout out to the San Jose earthquakes, right?
You hit a nerve, Jonnydel.
So, all right, let's see if we'll hit another nerve, because we may have to decide that the Patriots do dethrone the Niners.
Hold on. So I haven't had a chance to give a soliloquy on Tom Brady.
You haven't had an 18-minute sermon lately.
So I mean, I do have an issue of saying, Tom Brady not quite there with Wayne Gretzky, and here's why: is if Tommy Boy is not on the Patriots, what is their chance of being a relevant team?
If Joe Montana's not on the Niners, what are their chance of being a relevant team? Steve
Young
DeBerg,
showed that they could be relevant.
Steve DeBerg wasn't doing it.
A friend of mine once
but
said,
I'm saying, like, if you put another really, really good quarterback, if you put Dan Marino on the 1980s 49ers, he probably wins a Super Bowl. Okay. I think you could make that argument. If you put another really good hockey player on some of those New York Rangers teams, I think you'd still have a Stanley Cup. If you say we substitute almost any other top player in the league with them on their team and they don't win, you're looking at guys like Tom Brady, and I'm looking at in the 2010s. 2000s, those teams were ridiculously stacked. But I think it's that and Michael Jordan. I think those are 2 guys that that they elevated their team at a level that nobody else in the league could. And their dominance in the league was prove that when you look at the Patriots, okay, for example, the 2010s, people think about the Patriots as the ridiculous offense they had when it was 2008 with Randy Moss, and they were running up the score on everybody. They were as good of an offensively ranked team throughout almost the entire 2010s when they didn't have Randy Moss, when they didn't have Wes Welker, that they rebuilt that team. And it was year after year. Tom was putting up 4,500 yards a year after year after year after year, changing offensive coordinators. And it was still doing it. I don't see anybody in sports outside of Michael Jordan that did that with their team. And as much as I don't like Tom Brady, I say the guy went to 10 Super Bowls.
That's nuts.
That is ridiculous. Every other year,
talk about a decade. That's a decade. Literally a full decade.
Every other year, we'd all get and in the of that, he went to like 8 or 9 other AFC Championship games. It was every year. It was either the Patriots in the Super Bowl or they were the runner-up to the team that went to the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
I mean that is insane what they have.
He's lost more Super Bowls than players will ever even touch. Even see.
Yeah, John Elway lost as many Super Bowls as Tom Brady. We don't put them in the same categories.
Yeah, for sure. That it's true.
And John Elway's in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Deserves to be.
I mean, that Packers,
Even if he didn't
Broncos
win
Super
2
Bowl
Super
was
Bowls,
great.
he'd still be in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Right.
I mean, when John Elway hit that helicopter,
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that was he wanted it more than everybody else on the field. I mean,
and that's the thing I think that separates with Tom Brady is that he wanted to win a Super Bowl each year more than anybody else. Because I've never seen a guy who got better at throwing the ball as he got older. Like most guys, you start seeing their arm kind of deteriorates over time. It was like when he was 39, he had more velocity and accuracy with his arm than he did when he was 31. And you're going, what in the world is going on here? Because he's just was insane that he had to prove that he was better than everybody else. Much like Michael Jordan, if anybody watched The Last Dance, it was like he would manufacture moments of feeling slighted, so he would force himself to go dominate somebody. It was Tom Brady. Tiger Woods was the same way. I think mentally, when you look at that, there's 3 guys in sports history that were just wired completely different than every other human being other than those 3, and that's Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, and Tom Brady. Like it's just you can't explain what makes them tick and why they go the way they do. Most of the people, who are wired that way, go and they run a Fortune 500 company because they're insane and all they want to do is work 18 to 19 hours a day. But Tom Brady. So the reason why I think Tom is the reason that they're in the conversation with the Niners of the 80s, but he's also the reason why they don't overtake the Niners of the 80s. Because without Tom, that team is not the dynasty that it is. Now they have a great head coach. I mean, but they, you can see without Tom, they do not have a chance for a Super Bowl. The 49ers had a succession plan for Joe Montana. They went and won a Super Bowl. They were still top of the league in point differential. Without Tom, the Patriots are not.
How
they did
dare
have
you,
Hall of Famer.
Jonnydel, how dare you disrespect Matt Castle like that?
You know what's funny is the way I used to like bag on Brady early in his career, I was like, he's so overrated. I told people this one time, and I was like, see, I was right, because I was like, the Patriots have so much talent. They could put a guy who was a backup quarterback in college in there and still win 10 games and throw for 4,000 yards. And then Matt Castle did it. And I was like, see, but then Tom Brady, you wonder if did Matt Castle and that whole thing, the success he had in that one season, do you think that fueled Tom even more? Like that's the kind of thing, like, 'cause he came back and he threw for like 4,900 yards and 45 touchdowns, something like that the next year.
Drafting Jimmy G, did that do it again to him?
I think it did. I think drafting any quarterback at any point ever, it could have been an undrafted free agent. He's like, these freaking guys are trying to push me out the door.
I'll show him. And I'll show Giselle.
I'm still the GOAT.
I'll show Giselle I can make more money than her.
Is there any argument then between the 2000s Patriots versus the 2010 Patriots then? Between the two?
If you stack them.
They got it done different ways. I mean, you look at the Super Bowls they won, their defense in the 2000s was really carrying the bulk of the weight. When you look at the 2010s, it was their offense. Their defense had moments like, against the Rams when Jared Goff managed to get his way out of Los Angeles.
That was the worst half in Super Bowl history. The first half of that game, it was I will say that was the worst half of Super Bowl football I have ever seen. And I'm 43 years old, and I've seen a lot of Super Bowls.
Well, this last year was competing very hard with that, though.
No, there was still scoring. There was still that
it took a while to go. It took a while to get going.
I agree. It took a little bit, but that was not as bad. It truly was not.
I was just saying they're trying to push it this year. They're trying to push it.
We're not ready to talk about this. What is this?
I didn't
sign up for this.
Yeah, when you told him when we told him about the podcast, we wouldn't talk about this last year's Super Bowl.
Yeah, we're just talking about the halftime show, Johnny. It's okay. We're just talking about the halftime show.
They're there now, Johnny. So,
I don't even know what the Super Bowl is.
But I guess
I was going to say though that the Patriots switch though later on the Tom Brady switch. I mean, they started utilizing their running backs as their primary pass catchers, and that was just like their bread and butter. And I mean, what was the dude? James, what's his cat? I mean, didn't he have like 3 touchdowns in the Super Bowl? Got Super Bowl MVP, right?
James White. James
yeah.
White.
I mean,
Danny
like,
Woodhead is the
I
other
mean,
guy.
that's what I'm
Danny
saying. Like
Woodhead.
these guys, like it's
Amendola.
like if
You're
you,
welcome.
what do they say in fantasy football? If you want to obviously shoot yourself in the foot, draft a Patriots running back because you're never going to
Yeah.
know. You do not know who is going to be the guy, right?
Week
And I
11, one dude had like 5 touchdowns against the Colts. Everyone
and I
picked him
think-
up, and then he benched him. Belichick
Yeah.
benched him the next game.
That's what he always does, and that's my thing about those Patriot teams. It's like, yeah, you can say Randy Moss or Deion Branch or some of these receivers he had, but I mean, it was really the tight ends and the running backs were his primary pass catchers and weapons, and he just, I mean, they had a killer tight end set, I mean, but I mean, seriously though, I mean, Gronk and Hernandez, come on, man. I mean, at the peak, it was like, who are you going to stop?
It was pretty
It's a
good.
killer
It was
squad.
just, it really was just scary,
I heard they hung out a
So
lot.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
probably
They like
probably
to
did.
shoot the breeze.
Oh,
They
this
did.
is the show to do it
That-
though, because we can't get canceled. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Sports Idiot Nation. Follow us wherever you get
We-
your social medias.
We can't get canceled because we strategically had our first guest as a woman, so people can be like, "See, look, these guys are."
Inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, we can never be canceled now.
Adriana's
Jonnydel
never
is married
coming
to a
on
woman.
again.
So
Adriana's never coming
came
on again.
from a
She's
woman.
like, they literally had me as a diversity guest.
diversity, yeah, a white dude.
No,
yeah,
What
cool.
in the hell's diversity?
Adriana
I
was
said
awesome.
Adriana, not me.
She was so funny. She was hilarious.
Good
Once we got her going, man, she was ready to burn down the New
It
York
took
Jets.
a little bit, but man, she was firing on all cylinders by the end. And
She was ready to
legally
throw-
binding,
She
as
was ready
Miles
to-
said, all words
Yeah.
are binding. She did say she'll be back. So
That's right. She's going
Just
to
saying.
Munich. She's going
So,
to Munich. She's
what
going to
I
come back
want
and
to
share
what
that
I
story
want
with
to
us.
know, but before we wrap this out, I want everyone to go through their list from 60s to the 2020s. What their list is in the order of what their dynasties are.
all right,
man.
I'll go last.
So we're already just assuming that the Chiefs are a dynasty. I mean, I guess they are, right? At this
Yeah,
point.
but they're
It's
incomplete.
half.
They get an I. They
It's
get an
half.
I for
Incomplete.
incomplete.
Right
They get an
now,
asterisk.
I mean,
they get a Barry
because-
Bonds asterisk.
No,
you don't-
hey,
Well, because you don't know how the rest of the decade goes, they
Sure.
could be the '90s Cowboys, and I
Sure.
could be,
I
in
mean,
20 years
they're
bagging
already
on
better
them.
than the nice
let's-
Cowboys. Hey, I will
let's-
say that they are already better
I
because
mean, let's be real.
I'm saying, do they have more longevity?
yes, than the Cowboys.
I mean, if the
We
Rams
don't know.
won,
Mahomes could get hit by a
Like-
truck tomorrow.
if the Rams had
Jackson
won one
or
more,
Brady could do something to really
That's
ruin
fair.
his
Like if-
career.
We're
Like
only
if
in
the
week
Ram-
3 of the season. That's fair.
I was gonna say if the Rams had won one more Super Bowl, we'd be talking to him in the same light as the Cowboys. So, like, I think it puts a little more of that "are the Cowboys for real" kind of thing on there, right? I mean,
I think there's something
know?
to be said about the fear that a team instills in their opponents. And I think the Patriots of those times, even in 1987, when we didn't win, when the 49ers didn't win the Super Bowl, like they still instilled fear in their opponents of, oh man, it's the
Yeah.
Niners. I will admit that the Chiefs have that factor, that year in and year out in the 2020s, that every single game they play, there are opposing fans that say, oh no, we're playing the Chiefs. I'm
Sure.
just telling you, that's what I think, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Niners fans
fair.
included, right? Niners fans included, right?
Anyway, a little bit, I admit. I mean, I don't want to see those guys. I just don't.
No,
like.
nobody does. You're right. Nobody does. I mean, the
Right,
Titans
you
have
don't
had some
either.
success.
Shoot, you're in the AFC,
Hey.
dude.
Hey, we've had some
It's
success against
irrelevant.
them.
It's irrelevant for the Titans. So
Yeah, we got a long way to go.
And
All
don't
right.
you
Yeah.
forget it. So, all right, then
All
let's
right,
go
let's
through. Miles, why don't you
Dragon.
start us off then?
oh dear God. Okay, so
Well,
got to
I
start
thought
at the
you-
bottom.
thought
No,
you'd be
I know,
ready.
but I still everyone should be saying "Dear God" because I might
It's
regret
tough.
the order of this anyways. So I'll still include the Chiefs, but understanding that they get an eye for incomplete. But yeah, I think already you have to put the Cowboys at the bottom. I agree that already I'm going to put the Chiefs right above the Cowboys. So you got the Cowboys last. You got the Chiefs for the 2020s already. More to come. God, right above that, I'll put the 2010 Patriots, the 2010s Patriots above that,
Okay.
and then I'm going to put the 60s Packers. And the main reason I can't put them higher is just because for the majority of the decade you didn't have The you didn't have the league. I
Didn't
mean, you didn't
exist.
have half the league. Yeah. So they get demerits for
My
that.
friends call me
Not their fault,
Ruxin.
but it's
They didn't
reality.
have the league.
Yeah. So I'll put the 60 Packers right above that. And then, man, it's grinding teeth for me, but I think I do have to put the Steelers, the 70 Steelers, third. And I think because Miami chomps into that, they were the team of the first 3 years of the 70s. And then I'll put second the 2000s Patriots. And I mean, really, as much as I want to not say this in front of two of the biggest Niner fans I will ever meet in my life, I got to give it up. I got to go 80s Niners.
Heard. Can't argue that. Ti.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even argue with Miles' format there. I mean, I think
Any changes?
I mean, I think I'd be willing to go ahead and bank on Mahomes finishing his story instead of the incomplete, and maybe move him up a little bit in the ranks, maybe over the Packers. Man, the Titans fan in me doesn't want me to move him up over the Steelers. I think the top three, I think I'm good with Miles. I think the only thing is I would maybe swap the Chiefs and the Packers, just because I've kind of went on record multiple times. I think Andy Reid is in from my perspective the true GOAT coach over Belichick, and I think highly in what he brings to the table, how his players respond, and nobody is stopping Patrick Mahomes on the field. And how old is the kid? How old is Patrick Mahomes?
29.
27?
He's not even 30. Yeah, he's not 30.
Like, so I don't know. That would be my only switch, I think. And that's tough. That's tough for me to do that. But it's tough for me to disagree with Miles at all there. I mean, he kind of nailed it.
All right, Johnny.
The only thing I'd switch around is I'd put the Packers over the Steelers, just because of the legacy of Vince Lombardi and the people that came out from under him as far as coaching and the impact that his approach and leadership style of everything, the reverberations of him throughout the history of the league. I would combine the 2000 and 2010 Patriots into one dynasty, just because I think you can't separate those, because at the heart of that dynasty are two guys. That's Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. And so because those guys were there the entire time, I think we also have to consider the longevity of what they did together for so long. I mean, Bill Walsh burned out. He couldn't handle the pressure of it year after year after year for so long as he was getting an age. Bill Belichick seemed to thrive in it just as much. Will Andy Reid be able to do that? Will Andy Reid be able to do this with Patrick Mahomes for another 15 years, 12 years? I mean, that part of it. So I would say, Niners as the number one dynasty, and then I would put the Patriots behind that, just because of, you can't dismiss 6 Super Bowls, 9 Super Bowl appearances. Them to be able to do that and coexist for as long as they did, that's hard for guys like that. And you look at these other dynasties, they weren't able to do that. And then I would have the Packers, and then Steelers, Cowboys, and Chiefs, just because I don't like crowning somebody before they've earned it. And they're on their way. The Chiefs are, but if there is any good in the universe, they will not finish the rest of this decade with another Super Bowl win.
They shan't. So yeah, I will have a little bit of a different take. When I think of dynasty, I go for as long as the dynasty went for. And so just because a team took it in to 2 separate decades, I'm not penalizing them by breaking it down. I think that downgrades them unnecessarily.
Shots fired.
And I do think that the Patriots are number one, just for the simple fact that already by default they are number one, because they encompass 2 full decades, where every other team don't even finish one single decade. This one
That's
truly
Adam.
is two.
That's fair, and Jonnydel is correct. It was one dynasty and two, but the criteria of the show is per decade. So that's how the rankings are going per decade. But to your point, yeah, if you're arguing that, then absolutely you could put him number one. That probably changed my rankings. But we're doing this per decade.
Okay, well, and I guess then technically, in the way that the show was introduced, I wasn't technically looking at it that way, but that is fair to move
Yeah.
it into decades.
Well,
So then I
it's
can
fair to
Name
bring
of
up
the
both.
show confirmed.
yeah.
It's fair to bring up both though.
Yes.
Because you have
Well,
argument.
then I will
but
go
teams of the decade.
I'll
Teams of the
go
decade.
decade then. I will change it so that we can get that perspective. Then I will say, as far as the 2 decades, the second decade to me is more impressive than the first one. So when we talk about that, then I will say that the Niners then are catapulted to number one based on the coaching trees and based on the Hall of Famers and stuff. And yes, Willie McGinnis and Teddy Bruschi and Ty Law and Lawyer Malloy. I
Mike
know
Vrabel. Mike Vrabel.
I know screw him. I know way too many
Vince
Patriot
Lombardi.
players. Deion Branch, not Tim Brown, who was the receiver that played deep. Troy Brown. Yeah, that played
Troy
defense
Brown.
a little bit. Yeah. So all these guys, right? Even some
Tim
of the
Tebow.
linemen.
Tim
like
Tebow.
Tebow, oh gosh. He was brought on for that 18 seconds. I remember that.
It was pretty hilarious.
So, okay, so I will say Niners won the second decade of the Patriots, then the first decade Patriots, and then I'll go with I guess Jonnydel kind of talked me into the Packers based on what they brought to the game and what they
It's a
meant.
damn good argument.
To
It's
the
a damn good argument.
it truly is. I didn't think of it that way, but Lombardi and all that. So I will go with them, and then I'll go Kansas City for sure. I do think higher of them than Jonnydel probably does, and it does pain me to say it, but
I just hate him.
I know,
I'll be
and
honest, I'm a hater. I mean,
they
we
beat
all
us
hate 'em.
twice.
We all
Like
hate
I feel how the Cincinnati Bengals feel against us. Like I hate that I can admit that I know how they feel. I don't enjoy that at all. However, it is just a statement of fact that that it's like, okay, you have to show them that respect, and
Don't
then
show 'em
the
nothing.
disrespect can continue right back with Dallas, like eking their way onto the list and bringing up the rear, which they should always be bringing up the rear, whether it's bringing up the rear in this or bringing up the rear of our show. So remember first to check out on YouTube Jonnydel's Football Academy. If you just enjoy seeing the inner workings of football and the hows and the whys of the game, you will see and you will learn a lot about the game, from different players who run a route where you think this guy's open because of this, and you realize, no, there's a choice route, which means he does this. And I mean, he really gets into the weeds in a good way, to the point where you feel like, okay, I've actually learned something about the NFL, and that's really cool. So if you happen to be a Niner fan, it's a no-brainer to check out as he breaks down all Niner games. But just if you're a fan of football, like I know you guys are, it's just cool to see. And then obviously when the 49ers happen to play against your favorite team, whoever that is, definitely dive in, because then he's breaking down some of the stuff of what your team does as they match up against the 49ers. So shout out to Jonnydel. You can check us out on our podcast. Mostly it's going to be every Monday and Friday. We go live on YouTube. And then be sure to hit the notification bell on his channel and on Sports Idiot Nation, and follow us wherever you get your social media, from TikTok to X to Facebook to Instagram. So also shout out to happy late birthday to Patrick Mahomes. He just turned 29 2 days ago on September 17th. So all that to say, he just turned 29.
Does anybody know what he's allergic to? I'd like
Where's
to
your
send
answer?
him a gift.
Right. Yeah. He's allergic to
Brutal.
losing. I feel
I mean, hold on. You can edit that out, right, Adam?
yeah, we don't want to be canceled.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
It's definitely
Idiot.
not Swifties.
Yeah.
For
He
sure.
didn't
Watch
mean
out
it.
for those Swifties. Woo! They'll cancel you in a matter of minutes.
For Jonnydel
Blacklisted.
and Miles behind enemy lines and a Mr. TI, Mr. 30K followers, I am Adam Reno. We will see you Monday. Okay, all you sinners, follow Sports Idiot Nation on TikTok, X, and Instagram. Like us on Facebook, and remember, the most fun way to watch us is on YouTube every Monday and Thursday. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you can be updated when new content drops. Remember, the podcast can also be found on the usual suspects of Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Always remember, don't be an idiot.
Sinner.